The nation of France is in hot water today, and they're coming out saying they're firmly opposed to a boycott of Israel. That's the word from the country's foreign minister after a French telecom company cut its business ties with the Jewish state.
There's a growing international movement to boycott Israel, and it includes everyone from activists to rock stars to businesses, even some churches. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there's an international campaign being waged against this country to blacken its name.
It is not connected to our actions. It is connected to our very existence. It does not matter what we do. It matters what we symbolize and what we are.
Just this week, the CEO of French mobile phone giant Orange said he would cut ties with the Israeli operating company here, one of Israel's largest, as soon as possible. Earlier this week, Britain's National Union of Students voted to boycott Israel and affiliate with the BDS movement. The same group voted against the resolution last year, condemning the terrorist actions of ISIS. This is all part of the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, or BDS. The goal, punish Israel by encouraging artists, companies, academia, countries, and even churches to boycott its products, divest from its companies, and impose sanctions on the Jewish state. They claim that this will help end what they call injustice against Palestinians. Critics believe BDS aims to do much more. BDS expert Iran Shaishon says the clear agenda is to tarnish Israel's reputation.
What the BDS is trying to do is to create an anti-Israeli spirit of the times, namely to negatively brand Israel, so to associate it with the former regime of South Africa. Clearly such equation is false.
Will Roth is an Austrian-born Jew and CEO of the Israel-Europe Freedom Center. He says this campaign has gone beyond words.
When you go to certain areas, unfortunately, especially in Belgium and in Sweden, if you'll just have a yarmulke, not to say have some good word about Israel, there will be slurs upon slurs, and usually they will be violent at the end.
But while BDS is sweeping Europe, it is slower to take hold in the U.S. Ross says that's in part because Europeans become intoxicated by ideas, while Americans tend to fight back. The Presbyterian Church USA ended business connections with companies dealing with Israel. And the U.S. State Department boycotts cutting-edge cancer research at the Israeli Ariel University because it's in Samaria, also called the West Bank. Pink Floyd's Roger Waters openly criticizes artists who perform in Israel. But some, like Eric Clapton, Dionne Warwick, and Alan Parsons, performed in Israel anyway. American actress Scarlett Johansson faced protests due to her endorsement of SodaStream, an Israeli company with Jewish and Arab workers based in an Israeli settlement. According to Shaishon, Israel fights an uphill battle because the other side plays by different rules.
While we try to explain our position and use facts, they do branding, and this is a completely different field. When they shoot from Gaza, we said, well, they started and they showed apartheid. There's a mismatch between the strategies and the responses, and that's our problem. We don't understand the battle.
And in this battle, Roth says, American Christians are among the biggest Israel supporters. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, get used to it. You're going to hear it more and more, an increasing cry. It's called BDS. It's a boycott, divestment, sanction movement. And it's all a marketing campaign, and it's designed to isolate the nation of Israel so that a Palestinian state will arise on its own. And the key here is that new Palestinian state will not first be required to recognize that Israel has a right to exist. And that's the bottom line. That's the history here. When you look at the history of what's happened here, the Palestinians could have had a state at any point in time. All they had to do was say, we recognize Israel's right to exist. They could have even had it under the British mandate back in the 1920s, but they refused. And they especially refused in 1948 when the UN said, let's have a two-state solution. Israel said, okay, we'll form a state. The Palestinians said, no. We're going to start a war, and we're going to wipe Israel off the map. That's the goal, and we need to understand the underlying history and realize this is just a grand marketing campaign. Unfortunately, it's going to be effective, and we're already seeing how effective it is. If a major France telecom today says we're not going to ever do business with Israel again, that's a monumental boycott of Israel. It's the saying, we don't want to do business with you anymore. And if that catches hold and Israel gets isolated, well, that's a danger for the largest democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East. If you want to get more information, we've got something coming for you. Next month, on July 20th, we're going to premiere a series called The Hope here on the 700 Club. And it will trace the real history, how God moved through ordinary men and women to bring the Jews home to form the nation of Israel. It's a largely untold story, and it's untold even in Israel. It's definitely untold here in America. Well, let's take a look now at this preview of The Hope.
By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept as we remembered Zion. For those who carried us away captive asked of us a song, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? But now, thus says the Lord, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel. I have loved you, therefore I will give men for you and people for your life. I will bring your descendants from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not keep them back. Bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth."
Well, that's a preview of it. It will be a 10-part series beginning here on the 700 Club on July 20th. There'll also be a DVD available if you'd like to watch it in its entirety. There'll be a website supporting it. And we're telling the real story, the story of the men and women, some of them not religious at all, not believers even in God, but feeling called to go home to Israel, called to establish the state of Israel. Get informed on the history. It all starts here on July 20th. Well, in other news, hackers based in China may have stolen information from government computers right here in America. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Thanks, Gordon. It is the largest breach of federal employee data ever. Washington is scrambling to warn 4 million current and former federal workers that their personal information may have been stolen in a massive cyber attack. The FBI and Homeland Security offices are investigating the data breach at the U.S. government's personnel office. They say Chinese hackers may be responsible. Hackers now have access to the sensitive personal information of up to 4 million current and former government employees. And analysts warn it could be used for financial fraud or worse, espionage. Former Olympian Bruce Jenner has been making headlines for his decision to become a woman. Advocates of gender reassignment surgery say the decision will help others make the same choice. But one man who's undergone the surgery twice says that's not a good thing. Author and speaker Walt Heyer warns that the surgery has a, quote, dark and troubled history and doesn't deal with underlying psychological problems.
We know from not only from Johns Hopkins University, who was the one who launched the surgical program in the United States in 1966. After 10 years of doing the work, they interviewed people who had gone through the surgery and found that it was not effective in changing their attitude and or their life for the better.
Heyer also stresses that the church should have compassion on people struggling with gender confusion.
We need to be mindful that the church is really the place, it's a hospital for broken people. And as such, We need to be the people who administer assistance and guidance to those people who are suffering.
You can see more of his interview at cbnnews.com. Well, the days of choosing a car after first visiting a dealership and browsing around are a thing of the past. That's because the traditional car buying experience is changing along with new technology. And consumers are now armed with more information than they've been able to get online. And that presents a new challenge for car dealers, manufacturers, and innovators who are looking to revolutionize the car buying process even more. Caitlin Burke has the story.
For Ray Huffine, selling cars is more than just a job, it's a passion.
I worked during the summers. When I got my driver's license and I was in school, I would go to my dad's dealership.
Passed down from generation to generation, the Huffines dealerships have seen their fair share of change.
World War II, all the car manufacturing plants got turned into military manufacturing vehicles, so there weren't any cars. And the dealerships just had to make it on service and on used cars and repairing.
The challenges of today, rapidly evolving technology and customers who are more knowledgeable than ever.
Used to, people would visit a lot of dealerships, but now they don't. They do a lot of the research online. There's so much information that they can get, and they come in very informed.
Consumers are now only going to a car dealership when they're ready to buy or go on a test drive. That means it's critical for dealers to have websites that are engaging and informative. A recent study by Cars.com shows that 75% of consumers decided which dealership to purchase their car from based on digital research. Huffine says that one of the major changes he's made is to make sure his website works well for smartphones. That same Cars.com study finds that 4 out of 5 shoppers use their smartphone to actually choose their vehicle. Innovators see this as an opportunity to introduce new apps that will further revolutionize car buying and selling. Last month, more than a dozen teams participated in Hackamotive, a 3-day competition sponsored by Edmunds.com aimed at reimagining the future of car shopping. ZipFlip, a web-based peer-to-peer marketplace for buying and selling used cars, won the $20,000 grand prize.
Come to our website, put in the 17-digit identification number for your car, and through a partnership with Edmunds.com, we can show everything about your car and send you a sticker to place on the car that is sort of an updated version of the old for sale sign you'd find at a hardware store, so that somebody with a smartphone can send a code in and get everything about the car, the price you're asking, negotiate anonymously, and even pay electronically.
Some other new apps that could be helpful in your car shopping? Carcode.me. That's a tool that allows dealers to create a code for every vehicle on their lot. Once scanned, pictures, video, vehicle options, and Carfax history are sent to the buyer's smartphone instantly. And Carmera, an image recognition app that identifies vehicles and calls up information on them with just the snap of a photo. Huffine says that changing with the times and keeping up with the latest technology is important, but the service he and his employees show to each customer will be just as critical to keep them coming back. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Dallas, Texas.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, Caitlin. Gordon, this piece is a sign of our ever-changing times.
Well, I wouldn't want to be in the car dealership business right now. I think it's getting ready to go through a revolution. Currently, there's some statutes on the books in every state protecting dealerships in that relationship. But I think the internet is going to smooth out these transactions, and consumers really want sort of a hassle-free. You know the price, you're willing to pay the price, you don't have to haggle, you don't have to worry about undercoating, all the other things that they put you through when you buy a new car. So these things are revolutionizing how we purchase cars, and I see a whole disruption happening in this industry.
It's a full-time job just to stay ahead of the change. Crazy.